Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Discovery Channel after a brief pause for a little incident like a hurricane that swept through um, um, central Texas, then into northeast Texas, kind of skirted western and northwestern Louisiana as it was diminishing. But our two uh, co-speakers here today, Doug Austin, who everybody knows from the eDiscovery Today, and we're happy to have Greg Buckles from eDiscovery Journal. You guys are both in. I take it the west side of Houston,
I'm dead center.
dead center of Houston. So you
Yeah.
guys got hammered,
Oh yeah.
right? Um, and we're
As did
out.
we, yeah, as did we. We got hammered. It hammered over a pretty good area there.
Yeah, it was everybody was. I had relatives calling. Oh, it's only a Cat 1. I said, dude, why don't you go outside and turn the fan up to 95 miles an hour and stand there for a day and a half and see how that feels. Oh, by the way, turn the hose on while you're doing it and aim it right for your face. Um, it's only a Cat 1, but it was a big storm. That's what I noticed as it was winding its way up the Gulf, that it was big, and we were feeling the very fringes of the outer edge, the eastern side over here for about a day. We had, storms and high winds, and it was a good little storm. But everybody's safe. Everybody's back to working.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we lost foliage again, but we've had three major wind events coming through the city within the last 3 months, and part of the problem is within the city of Houston, there just hasn't been a lot of true maintenance done in a lot of our areas and a lot of our foliage. So we've ended up with trees and stuff that are just susceptible. And I had my dogs up hiking in one of our local parks Saturday and saw more trees down, 3 and 4 foot diameter trees.
Wow.
I'll second what Greg said. It's down trees, down to branches everywhere. Some of the trees that I've seen down are huge. They've cut up trunks, like you say, that are really huge. This is now the second time in 2 months that I've had to throw everything out of my fridge. So that's always fun. So it's
Oh, yeah.
it's been a crazy time lately here in Texas.
And trying to keep up with business at the same time is always fun.
Yeah, especially as you're jumping around. Doug, you had to change locales a couple times, right?
Because I had to go. I went to one place then that had power, then they lost it. So I had to go to my niece's for a night. Then they got it back. The other thing too is, unless you were around Wi-Fi, cell service was pretty much non-existent in a lot of
Yeah.
places. You couldn't even text somebody. So it was really, truly a kind of a wasteland there for a few days.
That was the biggest problem we had during Ida, is that Entergy did, of course, did a piss poor job of recovery. The entire city went down, which we've never really had an explanation for how they lost power to an entire metropolitan area. But then cell phone cable companies were out, so that even after the power came back, it was still a couple more days before the cell phone towers got rolling, and so yeah, Seamus and I had evacuated after we had generators and then ran out of fuel, and it was like, well, we can drive to Mississippi and fill up gas tanks and come back in a car full of friggin' gas in the back of the car. What could go wrong? Or we went to stay at a friend of ours had was in DC. He let us use his place in Baton Rouge. But when we got the word that the power was back, we made our move too soon. It was like, oh, the power's on. Yeah. But there's no cell phones, there's no cable, there's no businesses really open yet. The murder marts, the gas stations, they were going because they had fuel in the tank, so that was good. But you're living off Diet Coke and Snapple and whatever they had on the racks in the mini mart. So it was
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, the gas stations here, huge lines.
Yeah.
Because people needed gas. Some people were just driving it around to stay cool, I think, at times, because that was one of the few sources of AC they had. And then I think a lot of people were in line because they had to get gas for their generators. So
Yep.
yeah, there were really long lines at the gas
Yeah.
stations. The few
Yeah.
that were open. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. The few that were open. Yeah. So, anyways, well, listen. Let's proceed to grilling Greg on our topic for today. You've become our go-to guy in the wonderful world of Microsoft. Um, so, as I was saying just shortly before we went live here, Microsoft had their Microsoft Build conference back in May, and after that, I started seeing some I don't know if they were press releases or just announcements, or people were circulating stuff that they had gotten internally as partners of Microsoft. But um, there were a whole lot of announcements about what they were doing or planned to do or thought they were doing in the AI world. And that kind of sorted out into three things: um, Copilot, Purview, and Teams. And the team stuff was completely incomprehensible to me. I didn't know what they were doing with Teams before the conference. I got no idea what they're doing now. Um, Copilot, they seem to be just, we're putting it in everywhere. It's going in everything everywhere. Copilot all the time. Purview, they do stuff as you said again before we went live, Greg. Microsoft has a bad habit of firing up features without telling anybody, and they've done that with Purview. um, Greg, I don't know if you follow us on our monthly case law session, but there's been a number of decisions in the last several months about attachments and our hyperlinks attachments and this and that, and a lot of discussion centered around the inability to grab anything out of a internal hyperlink, especially in Google space. Um, um, but Purview started doing that several months ago, again with no notice to anybody. First in their top tier, I don't know what they call their different levels, but the premium level of Purview would grab the hyperlink and any changes that were subsequently made. It would flag it and save it and keep going. But then I just read a couple of weeks ago, before I first reached out to you, that the bottom level of Purview now will grab the immediate document at the time that you put the lid hold in place. If you have bottom level Purview, it will at least grab that hyperlink. No changes, but it will go ahead and grab it and act like it's an attachment. So anyways, that's all very confusing because, like I said, we don't know what they're doing. I know that Google's working at trying to do something, and then there's some third party efforts going on. I know the guys at Lighthouse have been trying to build something, and I've talked to two different independent consultants who are building something for clients that they're not necessarily going to, sell openly, but a lot of people are working on a solution to it. So we thought we'd make your life miserable and make you join in our total confusion and say, what the heck is going on with Microsoft and AI?
Tom, part of what's going on is that Microsoft is literally, building the rocket while we're on it, headed up. So part of what we were all encountering is the fact that they have visions of major changes to architecture, not just architecture. In my opinion, they have massive visions for redefining what is the collaborative space and documents themselves that are moving faster than most of us in e-discovery or compliance or security or tracking. So when we look at documents, I can see a lot of gray hair on this call. We all think of everything based as we came out of the paper world originally, all of us, all three of us. I know I've done cases with all of them going that far back. When we look at documents, we still think of documents as whether it's paper or converted from paper or sitting in someone's laptop as an individual discrete file, or sitting up on a file share, or eventually in SharePoint, or on this. All of those are one packet, one package equals one document. And Microsoft has had for quite some time the vision of redefining documents as collaborative spaces, so that instead of having that document that's out there floating around as a single copy, now you've got pointers all to it, and you're working all at the same space. They understand the concept of versioning, especially if you've turned hold on. So that's why on that, when you're talking about Purview pulling back version copies versus non-version copies, etc.
Let me just interrupt though. You say that they have this vision. Is that been articulated anywhere?
Oh yeah, but the problem is it's articulated along with visions for for AI interaction, for visions for converting of the, like, I don't know if you've noticed, there's the newer apps on Microsoft 365. There's no desktop version. So we're moving further and further to, everything is a web app, everything is a service. We used to have a piece of software that we owned the code for. You paid for it once, you might have paid for support, but now you have a web app that you're paying for access, a subscription. In one sense, the data is following where the platform is gone that way. And so when we're chasing this stuff, and we all know that legal is 3 to 5 years behind, because our data that we're looking for is usually that far behind, unless we're talking about active investigations, ongoing disputes, regulatory inquiries. But a lot of our data that we're looking for is usually about 2 years, 3 years, 4 years back, and we're dealing with a platform that is literally evolving month by month.
Yeah. And when you say collaborative space, that in the back of my mind that says, so is Teams going to be the platform of the future for them?
Teams might be one of the interfaces that you're reaching to the platform, where they're going for platform. You got to go look behind it. And like right now, every Teams site has a SharePoint site, a OneDrive, and an actual mailbox. Right. So every site out there has got those 3 components in it. It's still discrete. It's still a portal through which you're reaching to data. But they're starting on the newest generation of data to move that data from the team sites, from the team SharePoint sites. You're getting pointers left there, and they're moving it over to their new SharePoint containers, which exist outside of the entity space in a tenant. Meaning, when I say outside of the entity space, we think of everything as being owned by an individual user or a Microsoft group. So every SharePoint site is a group. And when you create a group, it has to create those 3 containers, boom, 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 all the time. Well, they're trying to move a lot of that data centrally to these containers, where everything is pointed at through write controls. So, I have access, you have access, because of what portal we go through. And part of that is trying to go for, in the long run, a unified, accessible, collaborative storage platform. Because we are still dealing with the legacy platforms of Exchange, the legacy platforms of the SharePoint libraries, which are really just databases. Yep. And so they're looking, and if we get really technical, we go all the way down to binary large object blob storage back behind the scenes of these SharePoint sites and things, where they're storing things attached to the databases. All of that is a nice way of saying they'd like to have it in one place, where it doesn't, all they have to do is control the access, and everything is through a machine API portal to go get this stuff and bring it back. And then what just happened the end of last year, when they first created, and the label they put on it is loop storage, or they were originally called fluid files, and all of this stuff was being stored for free during the beta cycle. We're out of the beta cycle, and so now it's moving to these unassigned SharePoint storage containers that are still charged back to the customer. So They for a while they were floating it, but as people start adopting it now, the bill's going to start coming home to folks. But the idea is, instead of having 12 copies running around in different sites and mail, etc., it'll all just point, and they'll win in the long run because there will only be one copy living out
Yeah.
there. So
Sure.
So what's
Yeah,
all
and I
that do
saw-
to the concept of custodians?
bingo. Yes. Now you hit it. That's the problem from our side, because we always think of
Exactly.
custodians and who owns something.
Right.
And the reality is, not only does who owns it, owning has to do with custodianship and management. Well, if it lives in one of these SharePoint containers back there, you may have rights getting back and forth to it, but it's no longer owned by anybody.
Mhm.
You know, it's now it's like, or it can have 6 owners, quote unquote, all at the same time. And
Yeah.
so it's changing the model we look at, and it is obviously confusing to practitioners who are out there who are like, well, wait a minute, I've gone and I've done these pulls, I've done this, I've used Purview, because Purview's using a specific API, the Graph API, to reach back and forth. And Purview itself uses that API in all of our partner products. The reveals, the relativities, the Xteros, I can go down the list. I'm not calling any one specific one out. They all use the Graph API for that retrieval, because part of that retrieval is, in the long run, is reconstruction. It's playing Humpty Dumpty. It's putting the pieces back together. And so the reason why people get, like, we have to essentially go through essentially like the Purview layer to reconstruct these hyperlinks and these referrals back into a form that we can now, well, one, you need to re-index it if you're going to use internal content search, or two, even if you're just exporting it, you still have to put it back together enough so that when we present it to the other side, they know what it's doing, or when it moves into that review platform layer.
And you talk about partners, but what does that do other than make them pull their hair out by the roots to document management partners who have a certain way of storing things? What does that do to iManage or NetDocs?
It's a really interesting play, and you might remember that at one point in time when I left, I didn't leave eDiscovery, but when I was pulled out of the Enron stuff and recruited over to Symantec, it was to be a document, to do a product manager of document management for the old Enterprise Vault stuff when it was still around.
Yeah.
It's a neat and interesting play to look at players like iManage, Gimel, a bunch of the other ones. They're having to take a hybrid approach, really. The game for a long time was, I'm your archive, you put everything in here and I re-index it. Your live system runs your live data, but I'm your record repository. That doesn't work, because no enterprise wants to have a live copy and an archive copy and have to figure out how the two interact and react.
Right.
And with all these systems now interacting through these APIs into the Microsoft platform, we have all these external platforms now that are connecting, and they have their own data. They generate their own data, and they work collaboratively back and forth, handing stuff back and forth, where it's Salesforce, all these other external ones. Every time I go in, I don't know, Doug, you run the same thing 100 times. We go in, we talk to custodians, everything's in Microsoft. Well, that department happened to have a bunch of Box accounts or Dropbox accounts or Google accounts, they were also using it for these things because they couldn't quite get everything they wanted done in Microsoft. So we see it all the time. So the document management systems, the value they're trying to offer today is Microsoft Plus. They want to manage it in place by adding a smart layer on top that expands the audit, the tracking, all the rest of that for what's in Microsoft. And then they want to have all the connectors that Microsoft doesn't want to build to connect over to these external repositories and external work systems, so that you can see all the components of workflows, internal and external, at the same time, and manage your records but the game of keeping a copy, for the most part, is starting to fade away, except for some legacy systems and some folks who, I need to have this specialty compliance stuff because I'm underneath of, these crazy regulations. I still run into customers with that.
Yeah.
But you want to add that layer on top. and they want to add that smartness on top, which is partially what Copilot's theoretically supposed to provide eventually.
Right.
Sure. That's what I was going to say. Is that kind of middleware going to be provided by Copilot theoretically?
Right now, all Copilot's really providing for most folks is workflow support, content creation support.
Right.
It's generative rather than active. Now that's going to change. And Microsoft is already building the foundation tools to make Copilot be able to act and interact. I can tell you that in order for me to track a lot of the stuff, I have to listen to podcasts all the time. There's a Microsoft 365 developer podcast with some of the product managers from Microsoft. I get some of the best information I get from them because that's where they can actually talk about it in detail. And they're talking about it for Microsoft developers. I am not a developer much. I'm a hack, but I have to understand it in order to be able to extract data, solve problems, troubleshoot for clients, and develop workflows. Yet, where all the body parts are out there in order to reconstruct the crime scene. There's still things out there I can't find though. Microsoft Teams just added one of those features. You were talking about the stuff for there. Teams just added a preview feature. So if I share a document, it previews. One, that's a nightmare when it comes to actual investigative forensics, because I can no longer tell when a document was accessed, not accessed, etc. Because I can read those docs off the preview.
Sure.
It finally reached my tenant about a week ago. I have been spending more hours than I want to think about tearing everything I can apart, trying to figure out where the copies of those JPEGs are hid. I can't find it yet. I mean, Tony Redmond will find it and publish it, and I'll feel really stupid when he does, as usual when he publishes stuff, because he's really smart about all this. But until we find those, guess what? Those are extra copies of documents. And they're snapshots as to what happened when and where. I don't know, guys. I'm not surprised at all that all of our fellow peers who are out there in the world trying to do discovery day in and day out are pulling their hair out and frustrated with trying to know, where's my cheese? Where's it moved this week? How do I get it back? And what do you mean I'm missing this, or this? I mean, it's fascinating stuff. That's why, Doug, you and I've had this conversation a couple of times where I talked about, I guess it's longer than 5 years ago, 6-7 years ago, when I had to re-enter consulting as my primary revenue source, is I just made the bet I was going to stop trying to learn every technology and every platform, and I was going to focus in on Microsoft.
Right.
Every one of my major long-term retainer clients were all purely Microsoft shops. It's like,
hey, as a quick aside, you just, I feel like Groucho Marx, you just said the magic words. Tell us the difference between a tenant and a custodian.
Tenant is basically the enterprise environment. So when I have a Microsoft, if I have a Microsoft enterprise license, it's underneath of one or more tenants, because sometimes I've got global clients that deliberately slice their world up to make sure that they don't talk across barriers and things. And that's where theoretically within a tenant, all of your settings, apps, features, etc., all on the same level at that point. So when Microsoft rolls out changes, they roll them out one tenant at a time. People think that new features become available and they're instantly on for everybody. No, they roll out global and they roll out over time, but they roll out tenant by tenant so that they can do a controlled evaluation of that. And then the custodian underneath that is basically what I would call entities inside of the tenant. And it's a funny part, there's only two entities inside of a Microsoft tenant: a user and a Microsoft group. So you're a Microsoft 365 group, or you're a user, you're an entity. Everything else beyond that, because those are what control the containers. Where do we put stuff?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my
yeah,
God.
that's all clear as mud.
So I'm curious, with Microsoft moving data around, it's really not custodians like there used to be. They're even trying not to treat things as documents anymore. What advice do you have for folks who are trying to kind of stay on top of it and develop workflows that are going to be at least somewhat long lasting?
This sounds
Ah,
like this sounds like a discussion of modern physics, you know, with quarks and charmed quarks, and what's the new one where they can split a neutron and they can send them to the opposite ends of the galaxy, and what you do to one affects the other one. Um,
yep.
it's like a total realignment of what we consider to be our bread and butter documents. Yeah,
It's a struggle because it's like, best advice. What do you do? What are you telling to um, customers, clients, friends? How do you keep up with Microsoft? It's hard. I do a full 2 days a month just looking at the roadmap and trying to boil it down and figure out
really.
what are the new things that are coming out. And that's why I started publishing it, because I was like, this is just too hard. It's hidden stuff in there. All I'm doing is downloading the whole thing. Why am I downloading and why am I putting it into a database? Because Microsoft disappears that roadmap after 90 days.
Of course they do.
Oh yeah. When I did it, I was told by one particular product manager, you realize you have the only historical copy we know of with more. It's like, no, smart people out there are keeping this because they want to be able to refer to it. But tracking things that are going on, you have to kind of move into a trust but verify mode, which is you tackle one thing at a time. Most people start with holds. They'll move from that to collections before we even start going to how do we process, how do we reconstruct, etc. Start with one thing and one data source at a time. I said, start with mailboxes because they've been around the longest. It's the most legacy container we have. We understand them. And Microsoft does the best job of keeping basically the context around a mail item better than anyone else. You start there, get your holds down, get your collections down so that you're doing your provision. You have a way to validate and say, yes, when I sign off on that production, I can tell you back what did we do. Document it in the basics, don't have to get fancy. And then start doing regular annual, biannual trust but verify. And which is saying you got known data, new data that you're looking at every year. You take a day and you go back and you retrust your assumptions. Are your holds working right? Are you getting what you want? If you had a previous data set that you've already moved up into your review platform that you have a comparative, can you pull it again and do that side by side? What's changed? Perfection is not attainable. So you've got to have something that shows reasonable due diligence so that you can not get in the bad side of a magistrate asking you, well, why didn't you know? You're like, well, Microsoft moved it around. Well, how often do you check? Well, if you have a program and it's written down, that can be a SharePoint site with just, these are my general practices. Then at least you've got something to point at and say,
Right.
this is how it works. I mean, in the bad old days when we were doing forensics, guys, you remember this, we'd get a new version that would roll out of FTK or in-case, and we'd look at the release notes and, we'd go, oh, well, that might affect this or this. And we'd recheck a couple things. We'd look at, some old EO1 files to see, can I still pull my data? And then you move on and use it. Now they're changing it underneath of you. And the trick is that, define what you know and have confidence in by data source and by system and by function, preservation, identification and finding, pulling or moving the data over, go from there into the processing, the rest, go down your EDRM cycle for the rest of it. But start upstream with the basics of where you get in trouble, which is usually preservation. That's where everybody's concerned about. You can redo anything as long as you didn't lose it.
Right. Absolutely.
And start that one system at a time and work from there. I mean, it's kind of go back to basics with it. I mean, if tracking beyond there, read my stuff, read Mike McBride's stuff, read Tony Redmond, you know, Doug, you publish, you find, identify, and publish out a lot of really good content in and around the Microsoft world that I miss. I follow yours, you know, all those things you have to keep. That to me is you try to do the best you can, but get your foundations down and document it.
Sure. Well, and the roadmap stuff
Yeah.
you publish regularly is like a gold mine.
Yeah.
I'm definitely think that's something that people should be on top of. I'm curious. I've heard from a lot of people who've talked about Purview as all right from a compliance standpoint, really horrible from an e-discovery standpoint, like, you know, inconsistent search results, things of that nature. What are your observations about its e-discovery capabilities?
If you go far enough back in various things I've written, you will find me publishing test results on Microsoft's early e-discovery searches and the rest of it, and being pretty negative and calling them out for not publishing the fact that they weren't ready for certain things, etc. It's gotten better and better over time if you understand its limits and its context. So when somebody says, there's a very good friend of mine who wrote an opinion a little while back, as you know, as a special master, in which he basically called out Microsoft Purview and said it wasn't ready for e-discovery. Okay, maybe, but it depends on whose e-discovery, what's the context around it, and what are you using it for. There are parts of it that work very, very well, and it's incredibly efficient. And to say I have to pull everything all the time and throw it into a review platform is not practical. It's not reasonable, unless you are in a weird place where you must get these exact search results and be able to, you know, I need to have highly complex Boolean queries, and I need to make sure that, you know, I've indexed everything humanly possible. Purview works as designed, and if you understand how it's designed, it can be part of a good functioning system. But you can't just plug and play on it and say, here's my list of 25 search terms and phrases. Let me search the enterprise with it and say, boom, we got everything for you. You need to know what you're looking for. You need to know its limits. You need to understand that what it does incredibly fast and well, but it does have limits, and you got to know them. And you got to know your data, because it's not just about the system. It's about that client's workflow, that department's workflow. I have searches that work perfectly fine across most of a client's enterprises until we got to their engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And their engineers are using all kinds of applications.
Who can understand what the engineers are saying, right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Well, and so I mean, so it sounds like you're advocating you can use it, but you also have to have maybe a little bit of a workflow for the areas it doesn't index well, or doesn't search well, or doesn't, you know, support as well. Is that what you're saying?
Well, and in essence, actually, Tom, you brought this up earlier as kind of Purview standard versus Purview premium. Okay, I think I've written a couple of pieces on this, but I don't think I've really spelled it out as well as the market needs to understand on it, or that people probably even found it, because my stuff doesn't go everywhere. When you put items on hold in advanced or even in basic, behind the scenes, Purview is actually doing a couple things. One, it's actually making a copy, and it's re-indexing it, what they call their advanced indexing. We can look back at time and say that once upon a time they were doing that because they had just bought an e-discovery application and they were moving a copy over that so that it would be reprocessed within that application. Equivio, you know, was their original purchase. I don't think that there's much left of the original IP in there, but the model is still there. It actually is being re-indexed with a lot, because by default, the default indexing within Microsoft is about user performance and speed. So they're only doing the basic Microsoft file formats plus Adobe, and, you know, maybe a couple others, and then they're not going down through and reconstructing all of the hyperlinked attachments, all the rest of it. But they are doing that if you have moved it under hold or you've done a collection of it. which is why the processing and collection, when people try to jump into premium and use that, oh, I can use Microsoft now, I can use this for all this. Why they're like, why does it take me 4 days to get 20 gigs worth of data? It's because it's moving it.
Right.
It's actually making a copy of it. So it can be used if you understand what's happening behind the scenes, and if you have validated its functionality against your data, and seen has it. And if you understand its limits, what metadata fields are populated properly, which ones are not. I've seen stuff in there where we've got workflows inside of departments that they use a lot of internal document fields, like the author field, the title field inside of documents that are automatically populated in their workflows. Then they become reliable in that setting. I would never rely on them for a blind search out there, because 90% of the stuff I run into doesn't have any of that information.
Sure.
So, it's kind of a whack-a-mole game, but I think that they can be relied on by savvy customers working with good providers who are supporting them and helping them, who are willing to invest a little bit of work up front to build that better together flow, use Purview for the parts that it's good at, and then promote to your platforms for when you need to start, when you need to really understand what's going in detail, and you need a DT search of it. You need something that's actually going to get that level of accuracy buried down within things, or if you need the advanced analytics on it.
Yep.
So it's doable.
What do you see in the short term? I mean, 6 months, 9 months, anything, any big wow thing coming up for us, or is this just going to be a series of incremental changes as it pushes these changes through?
I think they're in very much in an agile, short, fast loop cycle. I don't think they're going for big moves. Their big focus seems to very much be, they were smart. They latched onto the GPT as the next hyper jump. They're all focused on getting that integrated. They're basically, what they're trying to do now is to get it all connected, so that your AI support now touches all the different elements. They're doing things like merging the old task application into Planner, and then having that surface inside of Teams as a place where you can use it. Because if we start putting together goals, plans, and actions within meetings and things, now all of a sudden we've got more accountability, we've got more visibility. They tried doing that once upon a time with all the kind of early productivity stuff that came back and told you how many hours you'd wasted the day before, and nobody liked it. Now they're actually trying to build all that stuff together. And it's so from discovery in the next 6 months or so, the things I'm watching are all of what I call the secondary sources. I'm not worried about mail. I'm not really worried about OneDrive. I'm worried a little bit about SharePoint and us moving everything around. What I'm really concerned about, and I'm focused in on it, is user adoption of things like Loop and these new UIs, and where are they storing the data? Because that's the scary part for us in terms of preservation, in terms of retrieval, is, do I know where everything is, and how do I put Humpty Dumpty back together again? Because that's our job. Our job is to find it and produce it. And that's, so short term, that's where I'm really focused on.
So you've done a good job of explaining what's going on. I'm not sure you've made me feel any more comfortable.
I don't think it's going to move so fast we can't keep up with it, but we need to keep up with it as a community.
Well, that's the real problem, isn't there? I mean, Microsoft, in my estimation, has done a horrible job of providing a resource to do that. And so, as Doug said, we rely on people like you to get that information out to us. There's no real resources. There's no training resources. There's no good resources available from Microsoft. Now, and I understand that would be a monumental task, but that being said, as you said at the beginning, we're riding on a rocket ship that they're building as we go, and that's kind of scary. But
well, and they're looking forward, not back on stuff. We look back. So
yeah,
we're
Right.
trying to figure out what happened 4 months ago, 5 months ago.
yeah. Hey, wait a minute. Where'd that retro rocket booster just go?
Right.
I was using that.
And to be fair to the Microsoft teams, our product management, product marketing, the rest of their education, their groups, etc. Microsoft traditionally supplied software. Now
Yeah.
they're supplying services.
Right.
And the direct consumer of all that education information, Microsoft Learn, the whole Microsoft Learn network, were administrators, not end users. We are actually end users. We're not
Good point.
administrators.
Good
We're
point.
not implementing, we're not doing stuff. We are coming afterwards. And Purview is a compliance use tool sitting on top of it. So when they're writing their documents, when they're writing their content, when they're generating these things out, they're generating it towards the admins, not towards us. I've been trying to develop plain language alternatives and boil down some of the stuff. For quite a while, I was actually working with the Purview product management team to try to do kind of a Purview for Dummies book and stuff. I decided that it changed so fast that I threw my hands up, took all my notes and all my diagrams and everything, and I've started actually trying to publish it out more as a wiki where I can start getting more community
Oh, there you go. Good
interaction,
idea.
so that I can make it evergreen and keep changing it. And I think I just threw a temporary label on it called it Geek Guides because I'm a geek and I know it, and we need help. But
Yeah.
we need more than that. We've got to have our educational groups. Can't be just individuals like me or Mike or other folks who are trying to write all the time. Because frankly, I don't make any money off it. I'm doing it because I'm trying to track it, and I need everybody else in the industry to help put their information in so we can all. I need the person out there who stumble into a problem and throws it up to us, the rest of us, tonight, and look and go, oh yeah, that is a problem. Let's see if we can get it done. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on. How do we work around it? How do we go to Microsoft, get them to fix it? It's too big for one, or even large companies, even the big service providers. I don't think can really.
Yeah.
And they don't want to share their knowledge when they've learned it the hard way. I'm sharing it because
Right.
I'm one person, and it doesn't hurt me to publish it out there. But we need community stuff, and it needs to be underneath of an EDRM and ASEDS. It needs to be underneath of an umbrella in the long run. I'm just developing up the content right now because I need it.
I'm sure the law schools will pick up on it.
Come on, Tom. The law schools are focused on law.
Yes. Well, and Tom's never said a sarcastic thing in his life, so that's there you
I don't
go.
mind them focusing on the law, but why do we still need to learn the rule in Shelley's case? Let's do some. At least get into the 20th century. Never mind.
I've seen good stuff out of some.
Oh, I know there are. It's way
Georgetown,
better than it was 10, 12 years ago, without a doubt. Without a doubt. But to your point, yes, we need some sort of a group that would take on that challenge. But it is a challenge, and
who's going to sponsor it? Who's gonna actually put resources towards it besides like me, who are hacking away at our WordPress at Saturday nights.
Exactly.
Trying to get it up there. But I don't know. The problem is that we can't just wait for it, because Microsoft is where our evidence lives. It's there now. We're not going to move hundreds of terabytes or petabytes of data to another system in order to process it.
No.
So it's
we have to get a handle on this. Yep.
It's got to be preserved in place, and we have to be able to use it.
Yep.
And they may be building the rocket ship as we're flying in it, but we are flying in it, and we need it to work.
Yeah.
So
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time to scare the bejesus
utterly
out of
confuse
us.
us.
That was great.
You didn't even get into all the different varieties of co-pilots you can now use.
Oh no, I didn't even want to go down that. So you know what? that's a conversation for next month.
Got it.
We'll come back and visit the wonderful world of Copilot, because
I would
I do
love.
think there's a lot of exciting stuff going
I
on
think there's a
there.
lot of exciting stuff, and what I keep wanting to see people in our peers publish are folks like me who are willing to go out there and, you know, leverage licenses and put money down to play with co-pilots or the other AIs on their own data sources and be able to at least report back to the rest of us, was this worthwhile? Did you get anything valuable out of it? What can it tell you about your own data? I mean, that's the fascinating part to me. I was never interested in the big giant GPT global generative stuff. I was always interested in, I got 20 years worth of content that I would love to see what can it do with it.
Yeah. So I'll tickle that for a return, maybe after ILTA. We can see what's going on at ILTA and then come back and revisit that
Sounds fun, though.
in August, assuming that we haven't had, we're only up to B for the hurricane. That's like scary, right? So, well, thanks again, Greg. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it for both of you. It's good talking with you both. And
glad you're both safe and back to work. So, thanks for taking the time.